Shatay.
I'm Scott, and we're the Hazes.
Welcome to the Love Haze podcast, where we rethink the way that we love life. But this season, we've had some great conversations about purpose and the work that people are doing to empower their communities.
And of course, we know that in life there will always be a haze, but we can choose to show up whole, healed, and ready for purposeful action anyway.
So today is the finale episode of season 2.
Yes.
And we want to take some time to synthesize the great nuggets of advice and insight and inspiration that we took from the great conversations we had this season. And let's just go ahead and get into it.
Let's do it. So, just off the rip, what do you think about the conversations that we had?
They were some of the most inspiring conversations, insightful conversations. I felt challenged to think differently,
Definitely.
Which is always a win in terms of diversity of thought, in terms of opening your mind, in terms of seeing the world in a new way. Those conversations really did that. I'm just grateful for them and just grateful that we even know people who are doing those things and think the way that they do, and we're willing to share their thoughts and their time with us.
Absolutely. I was blown away by some of those conversations. I think like the people that we know, number one, are amazing.
Yep.
They are people who are out here. They are actually doing this work across the board. We know people who are involved in politics, involved in, history, who are involved in medicine, law, writing policy, promoting policy, mental health, grassroots action behind, bringing our communities forward and getting us ready for the task ahead. Just, we know so many folks who are actually in the community, actually doing this work and actually out there about that business. And we know that we know these folks, right? But did not know the extent of what it is that they do per se. So it was just a great opportunity and very fulfilling to know that this is happening. And we got an opportunity to kind of have those conversations about bringing that stuff to the forefront.
Yeah. And I, to your point, we know all these people, but what I thought was great was just hearing how everybody got to be where they are. Even, my line sisters who I was in college with them, and to know, have an idea of what they were studying then, to see how it came to fruition today, I think was really fulfilling. The things that stood out to me most were just the themes of rejection or closed doors getting you to actually what you're meant to be doing. Yeah. We heard from, for example, Jessica, who said, she was fired from a job, and then, comes full circle to the person that who fired her is responsible for doing, she's responsible for doing their budgets. Brandy, who said she didn't get into any of the grad schools that she applied to, and then, was interested in psychology and then went instead to social work, and how the work that she's doing is so much more fulfilling. Mo, who said he didn't get into how many programs did he apply to? 5 to 7?
Yeah, 5 to 7. And he didn't get into any
of them. And then just look at the breadth of work that he's doing today. The stories of resilience, openness, of rejection not having the final word, all of those things are just my favorite part of it. What about you?
Mine are around those same things, and I think more about folks finding their purpose work and just navigating through being able to find their purpose work on the back end of not only rejection, but finding it on their own through their own life experience and the things that they were able to identify, either that happened in their youth, when they can remember people who were impactful in their lives, or people who spoke a word into them that ended up being a pivotal point in their lives, that they can look back and say, there was this thing that happened that maybe I didn't give a lot of weight to in that moment, but that was almost life-changing and life-shifting for me. So I am so much about like how we navigate spaces. And of course, when you are navigating, you have a compass, right? And there are things that happen to us that can kind of shift us in one direction or another. And there are people that come into our lives that have an influence over us. Sometimes we don't give them credit for it. And or sometimes we don't even know in that moment. But the way that people were impacted by folks who came into their lives is it was just extraordinary to hear some of those stories.
Mentors, or even just, I think about Flo, who works in public health, who came in saying like she didn't have a plan at all. Like I think she might even say that she probably doesn't have a plan like right now, but how she just stays open. She makes sure that she's curious or, you know, excited about the work that she's doing. And then every moment that she's in, somebody like opens the door, plants the seed for the next thing. That is, I think, so freeing when I think about how many conversations I've had with people about, you know, I work in a career space, you know, people trying to get to their next step, people trying to find work that is fulfilling for them. People who think that they, especially when I talk about my background in dance and how people say, oh, I don't have a talent and I don't have a thing, you know, like I don't have this thing. And so sometimes people diminish their own work, their own talents, their own abilities, because it doesn't look like what we see like in mainstream media, or it doesn't look like the things that get the most attention. But to hear her say like, yeah, I was in this class and asking these questions and my professor just said like, go do this thing. And she's like, then I found my people. And then somebody else said, why don't you go do this thing? And she just said yes more than she said no. And it just kind of led her on the path, but she didn't like set out to do those things. She just stayed open. So I think that is a really freeing highlight that folks should pay attention to. Like you don't have to have it figured out right now.
Right.
You just have to be open and willing.
That kind of made me appreciate even more the conversation that we had with Kenneth and Omari, because they talk so much about like what they're exposing the kids to. And sometimes it just takes us being exposed to things. Like when we're exposed and we know that there are people who are actually doing that work that we may have been interested in. We have a tendency a lot of times with our kids to like push like certain careers, right? We like from the Cosby Show on, we pushing our kids to be doctors and lawyers and professional athletes and all these other kind of things. But there are Black folk out here doing just a wide range of work that is impactful work, things that our kids have had some interest in that maybe they've been steered away from, and them being able to expose our children to like artists and, you know, people who are brokers in different industries from real estate, even to financial planners, wealth builders, to even people who are doing like nonprofits, people who are opening Black banks, people who are doing all this different work, entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, everyone, them being able to expose those kids to that outside of the scope of just go to college. It's really big, right? And really gives them a space to think bigger than just outside of where they live. And I think it's important because so often when we think about our purpose, we believe something. Well, I'll use an I statement. I know that I believed that until I knew what I needed to do, there was always this, you need to be still. Don't be out here just running the streets, just doing a whole bunch of stuff if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And, you know, to some degree, we do need to plan our next steps, but also I think it's okay to be exposed to things and like figure out what you want in the midst of.
Yes, I hear that. Be exposed to things. What you're saying also just put to my mind the idea of like a calling versus like something that you're interested in. I think especially in our community, when we hear people say I was called to do this thing, we, most of the times I've only really heard the preacher say that. Like I was called to the pulpit. That's that scares some people, right? So the idea of a calling sometimes has been associated with this idea. It's like it's something I actually don't really want to do, but I know I'm supposed to do it. And I think from these conversations, more and more people actually like are really interested or curious about the things And they might not use the words it was a calling, but you can tell by the impact and, the longevity of what they're doing that they're actually called to it, but it's just a different feeling than I think we've heard. And so, yeah, some people might shy away from the idea of calling, but to your point, when they have folks who are exposing them to different things and like opening their minds, that can then turn into something more purposeful for them that they had not even, known it could be.
Right. I think there's also like this normalization that happens where people are okay with finding their way and
not having it figured out from the beginning,
and also being free to like answer those small nudgings that you have. Like a lot of times when there a common theme amongst the folks that we interviewed was like there were people who nudged them towards their purpose or what ended up being their purpose, and people who like almost gave them a ticket to be like, hey, go explore. Exactly. Go see how you feel about this. Go see how you like this. Why don't you take this course and see what you think? Or why don't you hone in on this thing and see what that looks like? But that means to me, how it registered for me was like this person saw something in you. This person saw a spark and said, I see this thing from my experience that may be a good route for you to go. Why don't you check it out and kind of find your way for yourself? Right. And that's important. And we talked a little bit about that, but still just the nudging towards purpose and making a move and actually getting out there and doing some stuff and then finding your next step, maybe even in the midst of that. I'm such a planner and such a like, I don't want to do that until I know it's going to be successful. I don't want to, get out there and fail. I want to have the best plan possible and being free to get out there and just find your way. It's just freedom.
Yeah, it is freedom. And we are not going to know all the steps of, we can plan till we're blue in the face, but like the work will become what the work will become. Like something we used to say in the arts world. Like you could have all of these lofty ideas for a work that, like, say for example, if I'm choreographing a piece and this is my vision for it, this is how I see it coming to fruition, and this is how I've set it for it to happen out on the stage, to play out on the stage. But the work is going to become what it wants to become. It is a thing that exists in and of itself. So that means like I could actually have choreographed this dancer in mind, but that dancer gets hurt, and so now I got to use somebody else. Or like this partnering scene doesn't actually feel the way that I thought it would when I choreographed it, so now it has to be something else. Or we get on the stage and this light does not want to work, and now we've got to light it some other way. So I have envisioned it and planned for it to be this one thing, but by the time it gets in front of an audience, like it has become something else, what it was supposed to become. So I think that is true for all of our work in general, for our bodies of work in general. Like we have set out to do something, to do one thing. Life, other people, external, factors influence it. And then by the time, you get to a certain point in your life, it looks like something completely different, so.
For me too, though, the kind of fear, and we talked about this in the first season, was that, we have to make choices towards love or we make choices towards fear, right? And some of that fear can kind of play into you finding your purpose work as well, because maybe it doesn't look like what people thought it should look like or what even you initially thought it was going to look like. Yeah. And then in that way, it becomes your art. It becomes your purpose work. And we end up carving new paths and building new bridges and being able to be confident in that. And it's scary to be doing something that everybody isn't doing, and not just following the same old mold, but still being unique in the work that you do and bringing new light to, a field that maybe people hadn't taken a look at before. And making that choice really towards love and the passion and the purpose, and choosing that light over the darkness rather than, leaning into like this mold that other people have for you or this idea.
Yeah. It's about being yourself fully, wholly. I think that's part of the freedom. I think this is also an excellent time to call out these sweatshirts. For those listening, you can't see them, but the sweatshirt literally says, let your purpose be bigger than your fear. And that's exactly basically what you were just saying. Like we have to, take steps towards love, towards light, and not towards fear in order for it to become something. Just take a step, one small step in front of the other. And that doesn't mean you won't have missteps, as you like to say, or doesn't mean you won't have missed opportunities, failures, closed doors. That doesn't mean that. But if you just keep getting up, keep knocking, keep taking steps, like it becomes something, and it becomes something valuable at a certain point. So then what seemed to be the haze for most guests when they were talking about the work that they do? Were there any, that you could really relate to that folks mentioned?
Thinking back over, I think a lot of the haze that, from what I can remember, was, folks feeling like trying to find the support for the work that they were doing. People who could get behind, like the projects that they have, finding other folks who are willing to buy in. And I'm thinking about, in particular, Kenneth and Omari right now, who sometimes struggle to have guests who are doing the work, who are willing to volunteer their time and come and speak with the kids. Thinking about Onaje with the gallery and like trying to garner support from our people to like
when there needs to be an education around it,
right?
Too. Yeah.
To get the education to learn more about Black art and be collectors.
Yeah.
And to buy things that appreciate in value rather than things that depreciate in value. And just taking a chance. Those are kind of centralized things for me. Like being able to, first and foremost, to be able to bet on yourself.
Yes.
The haze for a few folks was like, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna jump out there, and acknowledging how scary it was, but choosing to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And that's definitely a haze, because sometimes you don't know how it's gonna be received. Like, where am I gonna get my money from?
Yeah.
Like, how is this gonna go?
Yeah, I think taking the bet on yourself is 100% the case. I don't think that people saw that as the haze, but that was definitely a common thing. Think about Shemaya, who, after working so long in government, or being in the Atlanta area, bet on herself and took a job with, government in DC. Think about Jihan, who took a bet on herself and opened up medical practice in Oklahoma City. Just everybody who just kind of took a chance and did the thing to bet on themselves, not really knowing how it would end up. And for me, I think some of the things that stood out, Jessica too, is another one who went door to door, not too long after she lost her mother, campaigning to be on city council, those. I'm gonna take a chance on myself. I believe I can do this in some capacity, and we'll see what happens. And then, you see all this time later, those chances that they took on themselves, absolutely worked out. For me, what I was gonna say, speaking of Jessica, is the themes of self-care that came out of these conversations. And it could just be because of where I am in a season of my life where it's really busy. We have tons of things that we are juggling all the time. And we were just talking about this yesterday, the idea of self-care, what that looks like. Jessica mentioned, for her, she needs time for her bubble baths every day, or just thinking about Jihan and how she tries to navigate, having a medical practice, a free clinic, kids, husband, all of those things. And how do you still care for yourself? Because if you have given everything out, if you're not taking care of yourself, you don't have anything else to give. And so your work is compromised if you don't take care of yourself first. have fully experienced this before in my life when I was pursuing my dance career in LA and just doing all the things I was supposed to be doing right, except for taking care of myself. So I was working, a full-time job overnight so that I could have money to, pay my bills. And then I would sometimes get off of a shift at like 7 or 8 in the morning, only to have enough time to like change and go straight to an audition. I might sleep a couple of hours and then go to class so that I could be like investing in my craft, but also that's where the networking took place. And I would just repeat it. And I was not getting enough rest. I was not eating well. I wasn't like working out. I was not doing anything for myself. So, some months later, I'm in a full-on depression, not even realizing it. And for me, that didn't look like constant sadness, but it was like anger and, just easily irritated, just not fully myself, not really pleased or happy or excited about anything that I was doing. Just only seeing the negative. And then it wasn't until I actually like quit dance, quote unquote. I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. And I slept for like a month. And then I was like back to myself. Do you know what I mean? Like I had the rest. I could see clearer. I had like basically just given myself all the time back that I was giving to everything else. And that was the first moment where I was like, oh, I've got to take care of myself. And so it can be easy to like give yourself to all of these things, especially when they're important to you. That's one thing that Jessica said, like, she had just had a baby, but she is like in Louisville in the thick of the whole Breonna Taylor, issue and, the back and forth in the media, being on CNN. And she's like, these are things that are actually important to me, but, I have to still find time to figure it out. So that was a haze that really stuck with me, that I really, really identify with. And I think it's just a constant conversation. Like you have to just be intentional, and it might look different at different seasons in your life, but I think it's still important to acknowledge and be mindful of.
I do too. And I definitely identify with that. Just because I believe somehow that you're just supposed to always be moving, always be like whatever it is that you say that you want to do, like you're supposed to be moving towards that. You're supposed to be doing work in that. And I think a lot of times we learn those things. Like you got to always be in motion. If you're not working on your business or your business plan or whatever you say that your purpose for, then you're not doing enough. Even on some old sleep is for suckers kind of thing, and it's just not real. You end up meeting an early grave, not taking care of yourself. So I definitely identify with that. I think probably one of the other things that I identified a lot with was Shamaya, who talked a lot about her experiences, like with being sometimes the only Black woman in the room, sometimes the only Black person in the room, and kind of having that feeling like I'm being put on the spot to like speak for my entire community. And also like feeling this duty, this calling to like speak truth to power in that moment. And that's a haze sometimes, especially when you work for an entity like government. Because you don't know how your words are going to be received, but also that's your moment, right? To make people think outside of, regular old, is a whole bunch of white men in government, and you have this voice and you have this opportunity, and you just got to speak on it. I face some of those challenges, nowhere like what Shamaya does, but I find myself in my government job like, should I just keep rocking? Knowing that this is a bureaucracy that I work for, knowing that this is red tape, should I speak this truth? And be like, I feel like y'all don't care enough about your people, or whatever it is, and have a solution for it, or should I just keep my mouth closed and get off at 4:30 and go bake cakes and do mental health forums and not worry about what those folks got going on? But I think I feel a sense of obligation to speak truth to power and make it be known, but not in a matter of just complaining, right? But being being solution focused in those moments and being like, hey, this is an idea that I have that I think will push us in a different direction, and then to impact change on the level that I can. So that definitely spoke to me.
Yeah, that's I'm sure the experience of a number of folks, the first one or the only one, and battling against being tokenized or, become, just wanting to be in your truth and help your community without, some of the implications that comes along with that, for sure.
And also, I guess I can imagine like being in that space and people like with diversity and inclusion being so big now. I think people want sometimes our faces in those spaces, but they don't really want our thoughts and our ideas. So we can choose to like just be there for the diversity.
Listen, that's a whole other topic and a whole other sermon we can get into. I think it's changed in that companies are actually being more committed, more intentional about raising Black voices, causes, thoughts, acknowledging our contributions, bringing us in a conversation, not just to be the face of diversity, but to help incite or move or organize systemic change within their organizations. I think some of that is actually real. I think some of it is performative. But I think we are in a time where some folks are actually taking it seriously, which I appreciate. But again, that's another topic for another day.
But I still think also related. And I think a part of what we have to do is make sure that when they allow our faces in the place, that we have to show up and be ready to put our foot on their necks too. Because we were talking about this the other day, how I've noticed like it went from just diversity and inclusion to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now I'm hearing more diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. Right. So I want all of those things. Right. Don't just be diverse, but also be equitable. Also include me, but also make sure that your company is allowing me to have access. Right. Don't just talk about it, be about it. So we're going to use all these words and we're going to make sure that we're doing all of those things. And so when we get in those diverse spaces, we're able to say, okay, I want all of it. And not only do I want all of it, like this is what belongs to us. This is what belongs to everybody that works for this company. And what are you doing to make sure that we have access and that we have all of these things that you're talking about your company does? And I'm showing up here not to complain, but also with some solutions. Like this is what needs to be in place in order for those things to happen. That's that purpose work that I really appreciate about what Shamaya is doing. Accessibility as it relates to what Jahan is doing. Her conversation about just being able to travel around to different countries and seeing how important it was to them for everyone to have accessibility to healthcare, right, on those levels. Because when you think about how like poverty is related to so much of this stuff, right? So if I live in a food desert, then how can I not have poor health eventually if I don't have healthy food and access to it? So you have to acknowledge those things, but also give access for us to be able to be better.
Yeah, that definitely ties into, think about what Flo was saying in terms of social justice or restorative justice. I forget the language that's used, but basically being on the preventative end of it. So she wants to help create a world where we have to have fewer ambulances. So like, what does that look like? What are the policies? What do the measures look like for there to be worlds or spaces where, there aren't food deserts so that our communities can eat healthier and so that we, are not spending as much on healthcare or treatments for preventative diseases. Like all of it is related, and that really jumps into impacts. Like the impact that this work is, if you think about just these conversations alone, the 8 conversations we've had this season, because of this group of people, there are spaces in Oklahoma City where marginalized or communities have access to free healthcare, like free clinics, or just like pediatrician like Jihan, who's like traveled in these spaces with, underserved populations and taking care of them. Now, folks in Oklahoma, have that. Think about, we have in Atlanta, Black owned gallery, like dedicated to Black artists. We have Omari and Kenneth and young boys have access to mentors who can expose them to things like Tai Chi, and things like that. We have Shemaya, who is the voice for, like change on the local level. We have Jessica, who helped author Breonna's Law, and now the impact of that on no-knock warrants, which now I heard has made its way into like federal legislation. We have just everybody like Brandy, who can bring her mental health practice into prisons, and just what she's doing to empower women with that as well. Like everybody is doing something that is impacting such beautiful, positive change in our communities. Like just these 8 people alone, Mo, who is like preaching to us about, our histories and weaving together things that aren't even documented to tell the story, to like help us to be a freer, more unified people. Like this is like, we are living in the impact that this group of folks is, has offered because of the work that they're doing. And that's just one of the most beautiful things ever.
It really just reinforce some ideas that I really have about like the fact that we all have a portion of the work to do, that we all can have a seat at the table, and I don't have to be pushing back against the part that history plays, because according to Mo, right, anybody who says, hey, they don't deserve reparations, here's the history that shows how this country has systemically disenfranchised Black people, like here and here and here and here. It's documented. Here's the proof. And you can't stand against history, because this is what it is, right? Yeah. So if you systemically disenfranchise these people, then you have to systemically empower them as well. And that is owed to us. And the passion with which Mo said, and I came to get all of ours. We have to have Black folk with that type of passion for our people, in the midst of it, in the muck. Mo ain't scared to get dirty. He ain't scared to talk on CNN about what it is that we deserve. You have folks who are not scared to write things like Breonna's Law and bring it to the forefront and say, this is not right. And we won't stand for it to continue to be not right under our watch. You have folks like Shemaya who are saying, go to your local city council meeting, see what they're about to build down the street from you. See if you support it. And if you don't, stand up and say something. So often we believe that ain't my fight. Right? When actually there has been like a coordinated effort for so many years to make sure that we don't understand this part of it. Understand that in some way on every level, there's been a plot to disenfranchise us via education, via medicine, via our history, the rewriting of that and whitewashing of it, via our culture, and we have people who are actively on the other end of that saying, wait, this is ours. It belongs to us. And we came here for it and we plan to get it. Right. We want to make sure that everything that you've done to put us in food deserts, that we're fighting back against that. And we want to make sure that our people have access. Right. We're not going to wait for you to tell us that our culture is important and buy Black art. We're going to do it right now. We're not going to wait until you buy it and tell us, oh, it's popular. I don't want to see that. We want our kids to be exposed just like your kids are exposed. In private schools, we want them to be able to see that our people are doing all these things. It doesn't matter what you show on CNN about what Black folk are doing. It doesn't matter what you show on Fox 5 or WSB. Black folk are doing more than what you show. And this is proof positive that just even in our small circle, that people are doing this work and it's not what it looks like. But that means also that the media has been used as a force against us. It has been weaponized against us in many ways. So we have to actively fight back against those things and make sure that we're publicizing those things that are happening for us that are positive, and also that we're getting involved in the work. It's not just someone else's fight, and that we can all individually get involved on whatever our level is.
Yeah, I think to your point about the media, I think historically that has been the case. I think we're starting to see some change in that. I'm just thinking about, just processing what you said. Yes, historically, like stereotypical images of us, we always hear about, on the news, what folks in our community have done to do whatever is wrong, or, whenever we're protesting, how it goes left. And then they never really say that it's, for example, when you think about all of the protests that happened, last summer, and, the Minneapolis police station being like burned or blown up, and the picture being painted that it's us protesting for social justice, when it's really like other parties, plants, right? So there is a part of that still exists, but I also think that it's starting to change. I think the narrative is starting to change. I think we are seeing more positive influences, and companies are being more intentional. I think that there is, in my opinion, more of an effort for that not to be the case today than maybe we have seen in the past. So it feels a little bit like a new day in some spaces. And so I don't think it's all lost. I think that
I don't think it's all lost. What I'm saying is that it is us that's driving this change. I think that we are in spaces that we need to be in, to where things that have flown in the past that are not able to fly anymore.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to take that to publication on our watch. Yeah. And even if you do, we will call you out on it. We will take to Black Twitter and fix your article titles and call you out and at you and let you know that this is unacceptable. Yeah. And so we are not only like fighting back against that, like in the church down the corner, and saying, hey, we're not going to stand for this. We're actively in those spaces and have seats at the table, important seats at the table, and able to impact change. So I think a lot of those changes that we see are not because they are so willing, right? It's because we are in those spaces and saying, hey, this is a thing and it has to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely see that, especially when you think about one thing we haven't mentioned yet in terms of Flo's work is the voter's guide, right? So she is actively, she talked about being in spaces to advocate for example, free birth control, right? And to be able to see that impact, but also in her community doing the Sacramento Voters Guide, and like a group of friends getting together, researching everything that's on the ballot, helping folks to understand, if you vote for this, proposition, for example, this is the impact if you vote pro, this is the impact if you vote against, like just having that access to that type of information so that our communities can make informed decisions on the policies and the policy, or the politicians that are running to serve them. I think that is important, and exciting to hear, and impactful as well. And then to your point, right, like really speaks to how we are actively like giving in these small crevices of pockets of our worlds that maybe we didn't have that much information about when we were younger. I think that is a through line that kind of came up often in our conversations. Like a lot of the things that we're doing for our work these days, like today in 2020, 21, we didn't really know about growing up, like, yes, we knew about doctors and lawyers, what we saw on TV from like the Cosby Show or whatever, if that's not PC anymore to say, but it's the fact is we all watched it, A Different World, like those types of the things that we were exposed to, like what people are doing today looks differently. And I think people were open enough to kind of find their way to it. And then also to use it in support of the community. I think that's also the thing. Like there were, for example, there have always been galleries. There have always been, public health advocates and workers, but to actively have people doing it in support to advocate for our communities, I think is the thing that is the most beautiful. Like that's what it is right there. Yeah. Like these things have been in place and have been, other communities have had support in all of these areas, but we are just now like.
And I think it encourages me too, because even though we have our folks who are located all around the country, right? It's an encouragement to do it in your space.
Yeah, locally.
Like even the voters guide thing, we've been kind of convicted about, hey, we need to start that here.
Yeah.
When you have a group of friends who sit down and look at the laws that are coming up to be passed, of course, especially with the things that Georgia is now trying to do because we flipped Georgia blue, there actively is legislation about to, that's
disenfranchised voters. Yeah.
Right. That's actively seeking to disenfranchise voters so they ensure that they don't lose again. So there are things that, and they do the wording so creatively where it makes it seem like, oh, we're trying to protect the vote. Right. And really they're seeking to disenfranchise as many folks as they can. People who are more transient. Right. If your IDs don't match your address. How many Black folks do you have that are in apartments and move, every 2 to 3 years or every voting cycle, they may be living in a different place, right? That will actively disenfranchise those folks if the ID that they have on file from the last voting cycle doesn't match the address on this new ID that you have, right? So then they say, oh, now you can't vote. You're actively passing laws to disenfranchise those people who are most vulnerable and the people who may be voting Democrat and that type of thing. Those are things that we have to actively be fighting back against.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm grateful for folks, like Flo and the other guests we had this season to help us with that. And then also just to keep us all informed, like maybe you don't feel charged to do work at the level or in the capacity that they're doing, but at least you can take the information, be informed, and just kind of be a better, more engaged, informed citizen of your community. So everybody doesn't necessarily or isn't called or have an interest to be the cook in the kitchen, but you could at least be an informed patron of the restaurant, right?
Absolutely.
Tell your people about it, help them understand what it means to support like everybody has a part, as you said earlier. Yeah.
Like even with Kenny and Omari's work, a lot of their work started out of like conversations that they were having as two friends about what they saw that was needed, and a lot of these conversations we have with our friends when we're at dinner parties or now on Zooms, talking about like what we need to do in order to move forward. Some of it is just being able to have like an educated conversation and spread the word that way.
Yeah.
Right. All of us have that part of the work that we do. A lot of our grassroots effort they're kind of born out of like these conversations that happen almost all the time, just around, hey, I heard about this thing.
Yeah.
What do you think about it? Is there anything that we can do? Can we just spread the word? Can you share a Facebook post?
Yeah.
Can you encourage your friend that does X, Y, and Z to, kind of come and speak to this group of kids?
Yeah.
Talk to your friends about buying Black art, about getting involved with the history of Atlanta and knowing about the Black Mecca. And not just moving here because there's a whole bunch of Black folk here, but understanding like the impact that Black leadership has and how we're able to make things move because this city is mostly Black run.
Yeah.
And getting involved in politics on that level and getting out and even holding a sign and doing whatever it takes to make it go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good stuff. One question that we asked over the course of the season, that I think that we almost knew the answer to was like, do you believe that everybody has purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, across the board, everybody believes that everybody has purpose.
Yeah.
And of course, we believe that everybody has
Mm-hmm.
purpose. It was more about like the responses were definitely that everybody has purpose, but it was more about like, how do you get to it?
Yeah.
And those responses kind of varied across guests. What kind of resonated with you the most about some of those responses?
That's a good question. I personally just really enjoyed hearing how everyone got to their work. I love like Unsung and,
Yes, you do.
Eat True Hollywood. All of the stories where people tell like how they got to a place are my favorite things to hear. Mm-hmm. So that always stood out to me most in those conversations. And then you could always hear in their response to purpose how their story influences their beliefs on purpose. Mm-hmm. And so, I touched on it earlier, like probably my favorite thought or, idea on purpose is the ones where people didn't necessarily set out to do the thing. Mm-hmm. And like, they just ended up there because they were open enough or willing enough to just be present. Flows is just the one that keeps coming to mind, because even in that conversation, we talked about The Alchemist, which is just really just such an inspiring book. And it's a fable. Mm-hmm. And it's about a young boy who goes in search of a dream, like a literal dream. Like he has this dream, and then he sets out to journey towards the vision of the dream that he's had when he's asleep, and how like every part of his journey opens up the next part. Like he didn't know where to go, but he would just go, be present in the moment. And even if like he spent an extended amount of time, like let's say at one step, let's say it's a couple years at one step, then the next step all of a sudden would open up, and the person would be like, go here instead. And so he eventually gets to the place where he has realized the dream. I think that is life in a nutshell, right? And we might not all start out with some vision or some dream, some clear vision, but maybe it's just you have, I would love for my community to X, Y, or Z. Or I would love to know more about why this thing happens, or why this is this way. Or I wonder why I'm so irritated that like all of those things are means you're moved in some way, negative or positive, about some cause. And so if you are open enough to spend more time with just that idea, it could lead you to some very interesting and beautiful places. And so I think that's probably the thing out of all of the conversations that I really resonated with. People just responding to something that is needed, as you said before, or responding to something that they were kind of interested in, responding to something that they had seen before. And it could be a response after the thing that they originally intended to do just went completely left and failed. And so then they just tried this other thing, and it just led them to a really cool place. So for me, that's really the biggest takeaway. It's a reminder to like, I don't need to necessarily overplan. Or when I'm doing my vision board, like, yes, I can put pictures of things that I want, but really the thing that's most important is like, am I staying open? Am I taking steps to be impactful, to like stay fulfilled for myself? Because that's the other thing that I took from this. Like, everybody's enjoying the work that they're doing. Nobody is like, oh,
I hate it.
Right? So I know I said a lot of words, but that's really kind of, how I feel about it. What about you?
The biggest takeaway for me, and the common theme that I saw, was mostly about people just being able to be open. And I just kept hearing that, like I was in this space and I was open, right? Even if they didn't use the word open, they were like, I was here and I was doing this thing, and then I got some redirection, or a person told me to try this, or even Mo saying that one of his professors told him to write about something different.
Yeah,
that was like true to him. Like, don't try to be this thing that you think that they want. Like, be this other thing, because anybody can be what you think somebody wants, right? Be this other thing that's authentic to you. So openness and authenticity are the things that kept shining through to me. like being my authentic self, leaning into those things that I'm really interested in, and finding a way, to get to those things.
Yeah.
And that just kept repeating over and over again for me. Just like I showed up in this space and I was open. And open also to the rejection, but not allowing that rejection to be the final say. Right. Because we all will experience rejection, but it doesn't have to be the final say. We can allow it to be.
Yeah.
We can allow those things to put us in a place of being stagnant and not moving again.
Yeah.
And I'm beating down into a whole nother conversation about religion and all this other stuff that I hate with that, be still and, don't move. And, God said no, to certain things. And I just don't subscribe to a lot of those things. I think that we have free will. We have self-determination, and we can keep working, and a lot of these folks just showed up in spaces and they stayed open.
Yeah.
They were authentic in those spaces, and their gifts made room for them.
Yes.
So
everybody's gift made room for them.
Absolutely.
That's the best way to sum it up. Everybody's gift made room for them. And I think it's also important to note that it might not be gift, and like we said earlier, it might not be gift in the way that you understand that word to mean, but you could have gifts in so many different things. You can have the gift of writing, you could have the gift of just organization, you can have the gift of strategy, you can have the gift of solving problems, you can have all of those gifts. Like think about Anaje coming from an engineering background into the art space. And I was like, how does that translate? Because he says it really helps him in the work that he does. And he said, it's a problem solving. Like I understand how to solve problems. And he brings that to the work that he does as the director of the gallery. So like everybody's gift made room for them. And that's so important. So did anyone's advice in terms of biggest piece of advice that like we asked a lot over and over, what would you tell your younger self? Did anyone's advice resonate with you?
I'm trying to think whose advice did I think even a lot of that was centralized on like trusting your gut, like, and leaning into like the unknown.
Yeah.
Being okay with not being certain. Things that I still struggle with sometimes. Like I just want to be so sure before I take a step. And a lot of their advice was like, lean into how you feel and trust your gut. Believe in yourself. Don't be afraid to bet on yourself. Some of the things that we've already said, but also just knowing that it'll be well.
Yeah.
That you have the support that you need, and that is gonna be okay. I might have some more to say. I'm not sure.
No, that's a good point. All of that is true in terms of like sit down somewhere, like it's gonna be okay. Like you will be fine. Everything works out for your good. I would add to that Brandy's thought about not comparing yourself to other people
definitely.
And staying in your lane. I remember that well because that is something I more so when I was younger. I'm starting to come out of it a little bit, but would always be comparing myself to other people. I'm not at the same place that they're at. I am, I'm also doing this thing, but it's not looking like the way theirs is looking. And just really be stuck in judging myself. And I think that really allowed me to not even appreciate what I was bringing to the table for so long, because I was so focused on giving everybody else grace and praise and just accolades for what they were doing and not ever doing that for myself. And so that really, when she, that note about, the prize goes to the person that stays in their lane, runs their race in their lane. Was really a nice aha moment, or we've heard it before, but just to have that track analogy was really special, I think, in that moment.
That was really dope for me. It's because I know that comparison kills, and it can kill your dream, It can kill like your aspirations. It can kill like what you have going on in that moment while you're actively working towards like your prize, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to learn how to put blinders on so we are not, you know, so we don't see everything else that's going on the other side of us, so we can run our race in our own lane. And you can just get so unfocused sometimes and be worried about the wrong shit. Sometimes I be worried about the wrong stuff, man. You worry about my own self, what I'm doing, and also be able to trust the process and be able to be like, this is gonna be well. I know that I have everything that I need, that I'm purposed for this work.
Yeah.
And it may not look like anyone else's journey, but it's not supposed to.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it looked like anybody else's journey, then what would be my story?
Yeah, and to that point, you saying trust the process is right on time, because that was going to be my very next thought. Just trusting the process, meaning like it might not happen overnight. Let's take, conversations we've had even just about us doing a podcast and how like it takes time to grow an audience. And like, yes, we have great support in our friends and families, but it reaching a larger audience might take a little bit of time, and that's okay. Like that's a process we have to trust. But every single person having to like trust. Let's take Mo for another example, and how he applied for grad school, didn't get into any of them, worked at Tuskegee for 2 years, and then all of a sudden got into like all of them with scholarships, right? Those stories time and time and again, like Jessica being fired from a job, a year later deciding to, campaign for the seat that her mother held, before she passed away, door to door, knocking on people's door, like beating an incumbent, like that is a process that you just have to trust. And it doesn't mean that it feels good. It doesn't mean that it's comfortable. It doesn't mean that there isn't, a little bit of stress or friction that comes along with it, but just like trusting the work that you're doing, trusting, like continuing to bet on yourself. And then eventually you will get to a place where, there is a body of work in front of you, or you have done the thing, however it looks. I think it's important to just not negate the fact that however it's received, whatever it looks like you were in the arena and you like were doing the thing, You're
doing all right. I'm impressed with you.
Thanks, love.
It is. I'm trying to. Well, you already know I struggle with like growing the podcast and all the other stuff. They be like, ain't nobody listening to this. So like, what we doing over here?
I think it's important for people to hear that part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very much a struggle for me too. So, I definitely always want to be transparent enough to say that these are things that I know I struggle with.
Yeah.
And you ground me in a lot of ways. But as recently as yesterday, I was like, what we got to do that for? Like, ain't nobody listening to us. It's like Jesus, my mama, and like 2 of my other friends who listen to this podcast. Ain't nobody else fooling with this.
And that's okay. Like, you have to start somewhere, Yeah,
you do. And it's about things being organic, right? So I definitely don't want fake love.
Famous.
I don't want to be fake famous. I want it to be organic. But also, I don't want the clout. I want like people connected to me who are genuine. And also, I want that if 1 or 2 people are impacted by what we have to say and they find their work as a result of like the conversations that we had, then that's okay.
Yeah, it really is, if you think big picture, more about the butterfly effect or the ripple effect. I hope I'm not misnaming that. But, like if we impact one person, who knows what effect that one person will have on the world. So we, whether it's directly or indirectly, have impacted the world positively, whether like it's important that we just try our best to leave any space we're in better off than it was when we got there. And if that means the 2 people that are listening,
them 2, thank you, mama,
and that they go on and do something and impact the like we had a part in that. And I think, I think that's still important too.
That also drives the work too, then, because also you don't know. I don't know how many of the folks that like Shamaya or Onaje or Mo, who identify like a particular professor, who nudged him towards like being able to like use his own voice and not speak the way that they wanted him to speak, to be able to use his own voice. I don't know that you always are able to get your credit, you know what I'm saying, for that. But it'll be somebody who says years from now, like Scott Haze spoke at the Youth Challenge Inc. Conference, and he spoke about mental health, and that nudged me into social work, or now I'm a psychologist because of the things that he told me about mental health disorders. I don't know that we always get a chance to know how impactful our work was, but it still is impactful. And for way too long, I didn't lean into using my voice because I didn't think anybody cared about what I had to say, and it's just not real. But those are like my own limiting beliefs that I'm actively working on in therapy and that kind of thing. But we all have to know that our voice and our expertise and the things that we have to offer, they are an important part of the conversation, that we all have a seat at the table, and that we all have work that we need to be doing. And from time to time, we'll be triggered by certain things, and that we'll run into our own humanity. We'll have our own limiting beliefs that show up and be like, ain't nobody checking for you. And we have to actively confront those things and move forward still. So
that's real. Confront those things and move forward. Don't get stuck there. That's a word for sure. So let's talk about how we've committed to supporting our communities, or just supporting this season's guests. Support is a verb, and that's something that we take seriously. I think maybe instead of just focusing on how we, the Hazes, have committed to supporting or have already been supporting, maybe let's just use this time to like recount all the ways that other folks can get involved. We will put a guide together and link it on our website. Our site links out to all of where you can listen to the podcast on different forums or platforms, but we'll put together just a one-pager where folks can link out to each of the spaces that the guests this season have shared. So that could look like sending some items to Jessica in Louisville for her Greenhouse Family Resource Center. Those families most don't have a lot of everything. And so sending any of those things would be helpful to them. Maybe an interest form to start a voter's guide in our area. Even if you're outside of the Atlanta area, maybe just like if enough folks in a certain city say that they're interested, just making sure that we connect y'all. What are some other ways that folks mentioned?
I can definitely like get with Zucot's website. Their gallery website. You can purchase some of their merch, some of their
get Mr. Henderson's book, which is beautiful.
Custodian of Culture shirts, the coffee table book. Also with Youth Challenge, you can volunteer to speak to those orgs. They also have a link for donations to help out with like feeding the kids when they have them there in gallery. You can buy Mo's book.
Which is definitely on my to-do list, short list for book club discussions. And I think also it's important to note that we could take it to a broader scale. So a lot of the folks that we talked to are primarily kind of in the Atlanta areas, but we did have Louisville, DC, Oklahoma, and Flo and Sacramento. But I think what a good takeaway would be also is to apply these same supports to any other organization that you are aware of that maybe we aren't connected with. So like, is there a Black owned gallery that, you know, elevates Black artists in your area? Donate or figure out how you can support them. Are there mentorship organizations in your area that are supporting Black youth or youth of color in general? Support them, donate. Like, so find, if it's not these organizations specifically, then are there others that you're aware of that you can support their efforts and their work? And I think that's the point of it. Like, become actively engaged. And if you are not called to do work like this, then support those who are. And so we can keep the goodness going. Yeah,
keep the love going. That's what it's about. And find what your work looks like, even if that's just via support. Do the research, figure out, you know, kind of what you believe in, what your nudging is, and lean into that and support that until maybe you can learn a little bit more about it and venture out on your own or figure out a way to get involved. That's important, that we all just be involved. And while we have the advantage, like, keep our foot on folks' neck and make sure that they know our stories and know that we are coming for everything that we deserve. That's what we're here for. So we are to that portion. You know, everything with us is about the music, baby. So tell us, Mrs. Hayes.
Yes.
What is your music for the moment?
I had this aha moment, maybe like 2/3 of the way in the season. And every time a guest like would turn it back on us, I don't know why I was not ever prepared for them to like ask us the same question. But I finally had this aha moment, and it hit me that this moment, this discussion about purpose and about our community and about freedom, always freedom is at the root of it for me. And I know for you too, is Mos Def Umi Says.
Yes.
And he, you know, really in the song, one of my favorite songs I have on my little kind of soul rap playlist, but my Umi says, shine your light on the world, shine your light for the world to see. I want my people to be free. Like
to
that
be free,
is, yes.
to be free.
I was like, why didn't I think of that before? But that is absolutely shine your light on the world. I want y'all to be free.
Yes, Lord.
Like, just do your thing and be free and let your light shine. And like, that's it. End of discussion, period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think leaning into our light, man, and what we know that we have the ability to do. Once you know what your purpose is and are able to lean into it and use it to like light a path for other people, using your talent to build bridges, man, that's freedom. And that feels good.
Then you are like fully operating in your superpower.
Right. Come through superpower.
And then just lifting the people with that. I think that no is doubt. If people are in search of, not to get all philosophical, which you know we can, but if people are in search of why they are here, that's really it, in my opinion, to elevate to the highest version of yourself. And that while you are doing that, to lift others, to help them do the same. And that's basically what everybody we've talked to this season is doing. And that's
absolutely,
that's some good stuff.
Yeah. Well, y'all, that's a wrap. Season 2 is done. But we aren't.
Hey.
So we are the Hazes. And no matter if it's just my mama, a couple of our college friends, we are going to be here. We're the Hazes. And until next time, we encourage you to pull up to your purpose. Pull up. Why'd you take so long to come to? Oh, baby. And love. Tell me where you hiding from me all the time. Each time.